Welcome to Lexivia English. Ready to take your English to the next level? Here we learn through stories, slow, clear, and fun. So sit back, listen carefully, and enjoy the journey.
The flicker. It did not begin with a sudden silence. It began with a flicker. At 11:52 a.m. Greenwich Mean Time, GPS satellites around the world desynchronized by a single microsecond. To a human, it was nothing. To the world's machines, it was the beginning of the end. In the skies, air traffic control systems saw ghost planes appearing and disappearing on their radar screens. Across the global financial markets, high-speed trading algorithms trying to process transactions based on flawed timing data executed billions of impossible trades in milliseconds. The stock market did not crash. It evaporated into nonsense. On the highways, the new fleet of self-driving trucks and cars received a cascade of conflicting data. They did what they were programmed to do in case of total system failure. They stopped. On every major highway in every developed country, vehicles froze, instantly creating gridlock on a global scale. In a massive data center in Virginia, a network engineer named Maya stared at her screen. She was watching the code itself, the very language of the network, turn into a meaningless digital scream. This was not an outage. An outage is a broken wire. This was the fundamental logic of the system unraveling. The internet was not shutting down. It was becoming insane. The cascade, the first 24 hours, the flicker lasted only minutes, but the cascade it triggered was unstoppable. The world's critical infrastructure, all managed by complex interconnected software, began to fail. The power grids were first. Designed to balance supply and demand every second using internet-based controls, they were now flying blind. Power stations began to automatically shut down to prevent damage. By nightfall, entire continents were plunged into darkness. With the electricity went the water. City water systems rely on electric pumps and computerized treatment plants. Within hours, clean water stopped flowing to hundreds of millions of homes. The financial system ceased to exist. Balances in bank accounts were now just meaningless numbers on servers with no power. Credit cards, ATMs, digital payments, all gone. A person's life savings, their pension, their mortgage, it all vanished. The only wealth that remained was the physical cash in one's pocket or the gold in a safe. Maya was trapped in the data center with her colleagues. They watched the world die on their backup monitors until the center's own generators ran out of fuel. Before the final screen went dark, she saw the last verified report. 98% of the world's communication and logistical networks were gone. It wasn't a shutdown. It was a global stroke. The law of the crowd. Week 1. When the systems stopped, human psychology took over. The first few days were defined by one thing: panic. Realizing that the food in the supermarkets was all the food there was, people rushed to get what they could. The stores were stripped bare in hours. Fights broke out. Then came the looting, not just for food, but for anything of value. Police forces were useless. Their communication systems were down. They couldn't coordinate. A police officer in one part of a city had no idea what was happening a mile away. Law and order, a concept that relies on communication and organization, disappeared. Millions of people were stranded. A business traveler from Tokyo was stuck in a hotel in Frankfurt with no money and no way home. A truck driver carrying essential medicine was trapped in the gridlock on a highway in Texas. Every airport was a chaotic prison of lost and frightened people. The information void was absolute. Without TV, news websites, or radio, there was only rumor. People said it was a war with China, a solar flare, a punishment from God. Fear, fueled by ignorance, became the new pandemic. The thin layer of modern civilization had cracked and shattered in less than a week. The new scarcity. In the weeks that followed, the secondary effects began to create a silent mass casualty event. Modern medicine was the first victim. A person with type 1 diabetes needs insulin, which must be refrigerated. With no power and no way to get more, their condition became a death sentence. People with heart conditions, kidney failure, and those reliant on any advanced prescription medication were in grave danger. Pharmacies were looted and their supplies quickly ran out. This was a wave of death that happened quietly in homes around the world. Specialized knowledge became useless. An engineer knew how to restart a nuclear power plant, but the control systems and digital manuals were all offline. A surgeon knew how to perform a complex operation, but the MRI machines and diagnostic equipment were dead. Maya, the network engineer, knew more about the global network than almost anyone, but her knowledge was now worthless. As cities became death traps of disease and violence, small rural communities became the new kingdoms. A town with its own well for water and local farms for food became a fortress. They guarded their resources fiercely and did not welcome the desperate refugees coming from the cities. A glimmer of the old world. Amidst the chaos, small pockets of the old world fought to survive. A decentralized global network of amateur ham radio operators became the planet's only long-distance communication system. Using old technology powered by solar panels and generators, they broadcast fragments of news. They would report on which cities had fallen into total chaos and which communities had managed to restore order. They were the new journalists of the fallen world. What was left of the world's militaries stepped in. In some countries, soldiers established green zones in city centres, securing critical buildings like hospitals and government offices. They operated under martial law. Inside these zones, there was a brutal kind of order. Outside, there was only anarchy. Maya finally left the dead data center. Her journey home to her family was a terrifying odyssey through this new, fractured America. She travelled by foot, avoiding the dangerous highways and bartering her technical skills, fixing a radio, wiring a small generator for food and safe passage through fortified towns. The long dark. 6 months passed. The world was a graveyard of modern technology. The initial chaos had settled into a grim, quiet struggle for survival. The global population had fallen dramatically from violence, starvation, and the collapse of healthcare. Through the fragmented messages of the ham radio operators, a consensus about the cause began to form. It was a 0-day quantum virus, a new and terrible form of malware, likely created by a state actor, had been designed to attack the one system everything else relied on: the timing protocol of GPS satellites. Almost every network in the world, from stock markets to power grids, used the super accurate time signal from GPS to synchronize their operations. By corrupting this single universal clock, the virus made it impossible for any system to trust any other. The entire global machine had simultaneously lost its sense of time and had torn itself apart in the process. A different dawn. 2 years after the flicker, a new and brutal form of stability had emerged. The world was no longer global. It was a patchwork of fortified city-states, isolated agricultural communities, and vast, lawless territories. There was no plan to rebuild the internet. The knowledge was there, in books and in the minds of survivors like Maya. But the industrial base, the global cooperation, and the political will were gone. The priority was not fiber optics. It was finding enough food for winter. Rebuilding the global network was a dream for a future generation, if humanity was lucky enough to have one. Maya had found her family. She was no longer an engineer for a global network. She was now in charge of maintaining the small radio that connected her community to the wider broken world. Humanity's greatest achievement, a single, interconnected network that united the planet, had become its single point of failure. The modern world had been built on a foundation of digital sand. And when the tide came in, it had all washed away. The struggle now was not to rebuild the old world, but to simply survive in the ruins of the new one.